This is Death by Graveyard Shift, a hilarious feel-good cozy mystery, Island Whodunit Book 27, written by Tess Marlowe and narrated by Sarah.
Hi, Tess Marlowe here. Before Chapter 1 begins, please take 1 second to look at your screen and hit subscribe. It helps me bring you more free cozy mysteries.
Chapter 1. Reg stared at the plate in front of him with a look of profound, unadulterated betrayal. "What is this?" he asked, poking the pale, green-flecked mass with the tip of his fork like it might suddenly spring up and attack him. Alex didn't look up from her paperback. "It's an egg white omelet with spinach." "Where are the yolks, Alex?" Reg asked, his voice dropping into a dangerously calm register. "An egg without a yolk is just a sad white puddle of goo." "You are pushing 50, honey," she said, flipping a page. "And for the last 12 months, your diet has consisted almost entirely of store-bought pastries, barbecued everything, and whatever is on Santiago's daily menu. We have to start looking after your cholesterol." "I passed my medicals with flying colors all my life," Reg argued, crossing his arms. "My arteries are practically bulletproof. 1 year of retirement won't do nothing to me. I earned my daily bacon and pancakes." "You earned the right to a long, healthy life," Alex corrected smoothly. "Eat your eggs." Reg grunted, cutting a tiny corner off the omelet. He glanced down at the floorboards. Bombay was staring at him from under the table, his tail giving a hopeful, rhythmic thump against the wood. Reg discreetly dropped the piece of spinach-filled egg white near the dog's paws. Bombay leaned down, gave the offering a long, thorough sniff, then looked at Reg with eyes full of judgment, let out a disappointed sigh, turned around, and walked to the other side of the porch. "See?" Reg said, gesturing to the retreating dog. "Even Bombay knows this is a crime against breakfast." "He's digesting the quarter-pounder he stole from Lucien yesterday, Reg. He's fine." "I have lost all authority in my own home," Reg muttered. The garden gate squeaked open, interrupting Reg's tragic dietary morning. Gary bounded up the path, practically vibrating with morning energy. He was wearing a bright neon blue tracksuit, a sweatband around his forehead, and carrying a massive insulated water jug. Polly rode proudly on Gary's shoulder, rhythmically bobbing his head and screeching, "Inhale! Exhale!" "Good morning, citizens of San Malvino," Gary beamed, jogging up the porch steps. "What a beautiful day for cardiovascular health." "Why did y'all suddenly turn into health nuts?" Reg groaned. "Val said I needed to build up my sea legs if I'm going to be her first mate on the new boat. We're doing a rigorous coastal conditioning program. Polly is my accountability coach." Polly flapped his wings aggressively. "Feel the burn, no carbs." Reg blinked. "You taught the bird fitness slogans?" "He loves the endorphins," Gary shrugged. He looked down at Reg's plate. "Oh, nice. Egg whites. Excellent choice for lean muscle mass, Reg. Very disciplined." "Gary, I swear to God if you encourage her, I will throw you off this porch," Reg warned. "He's just supporting my initiatives." Alex smiled, marking her page and setting the book down. The garden gate creaked open, and Shannon stumbled onto the path, looking completely dead to the world. She was wrapped in an oversized cardigan, her hair a chaotic bird's nest, holding an empty mug like a beggar pleading for alms. Right behind her, Lucien shuffled out, blinking furiously against the bright morning sun. "Coffee," Shannon whispered hoarsely, shuffling blindly toward the patio table. "Please." Alex laughed softly, reaching for the French press and filling Shannon's mug. "Long night?" Night shift at the station decided to play online poker, clicked on some pop-ups and got a Trojan. Lucien groaned, dropping heavily onto the top step next to Gary. "I had to remote in at 3 a.m. and fix the firewall while half asleep. I am running on fumes in spite." "Did they at least win?" Gary asked. "Mendoza's going to rip them a new one when she finds out." Reg took a sip of his coffee. "Where is she, by the way? Usually she's here by now." Lucien rubbed his face. "It's past 8 a.m., Reg. She's definitely already at the station. We have a truckload of paperwork." The garden gate clicked open again. Marta stepped onto the path, still wearing her blue hospital scrubs. Her face was entirely drained of color. "Marta, honey, are you okay?" Alex asked, looking worried. Marta didn't offer a greeting. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, her wide eyes darting across the group. "Is Angela coming by for coffee before her shift?" Marta asked, her voice trembling slightly. "She's already at the station, Marta," Reg said, pushing his plate of egg whites away. "What's wrong?" Marta swallowed hard. She looked over her shoulder toward the quiet street, as if expecting someone to be following her. "I just finished my rotation for the graveyard shift," Marta whispered. 10 minutes before I was supposed to clock out, Dr. Rubio, the night shift pathologist, paged me down into the basement. He was having a panic attack. "A panic attack? Why?" Lucien frowned. "And why did he page the head nurse, not the psychiatrist, if he was having a panic attack?" "Because he found an unaccounted body in the morgue drawer number 4. Maybe someone from the graveyard shift forgot to fill in the paperwork?" Reg suggested. "I bet that happens a lot." "No, Reg," Marta sighed. "You don't get it. This body had a gunshot wound." Chapter 2. "Isn't Elliot Crane responsible for all the unnatural deaths on the island?" Shannon asked, raking a sip of her coffee. "That's the thing," Marta said. "Anything violent, accidental, or unattended goes straight to him. We only process patients who die under medical supervision, like in the hospital or in the ambulance, and nothing else." "To be fair," Gary chimed in, adjusting the sweatband on his forehead, "the coroner's office is literally on the same block as the hospital. They share the same back alley. What if the ambulance driver just got confused in the dark and rolled the gurney through the wrong set of double doors?" "That would never happen," Lucien said, rubbing his eyes. "Crane doesn't use hospital dispatch. He gets his bodies himself. He has that whole miserable proprietary system set up. The man treats his jurisdiction like a sovereign nation." "Right, I completely forgot about the death mobile," Gary shuddered. "Fifth horseman!" Polly screeched. "Lucien's right. An ambulance mix-up is impossible," Marta said, walking up the remaining wooden steps and sitting down in one of the chairs. "I checked the intake logs myself. There was no ambulance drop-off last night, and we didn't have any GS patients admitted for a while now." The garden gate squeaked open again. "Good morning," Rafa said, walking up to the porch. "Why does everyone look like they are attending a wake?" "Where have you been?" Gary asked, leaning over the porch railing. "I called you, but you didn't pick up." "That's because I was on the phone with a prospective client, buddy." Rafa let out a long, heavy sigh. "He called my emergency line at 7 in the morning." "Ooh, a new case?" Shannon perked up. "Corporate espionage? Another cheating husband or wife?" "Worse," Rafa said, deadpan. "He wanted to hire a private investigator to consult him on how to permanently lose his girlfriend's cat." Alex blinked, pausing her coffee mug halfway to her mouth. "He wanted to put out a hit on a cat?" "Not in so many words, but yes," Rafa said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "He claimed the animal has a vindictive aura and keeps pushing his expensive watches off the nightstand. He wanted to know the most bulletproof way to make it disappear, so it looked like the cat simply decided to run away, and no pee I would ever find out what actually happened. I had to spend 20 minutes explaining to a 35-year-old grown man that my private investigator license does not cover feline assassinations, or their cover-up stories for that matter." Lucien let out a sharp, sleep-deprived snort of laughter. "You attract the weirdest demographics, Rafa. You really do." "I blame this island," Rafa said, rolling his eyes. "Bye-bye, kitty," Polly screeched enthusiastically from Gary's shoulder, flapping his wings. "So what's going on here?" Rafa asked. "Well, aside from the fact that my wife has decided to starve me to death with this yokeless abomination," Reg leaned back in his chair, gesturing to the plate of sad, green-flecked eggs in front of him. "We have an unaccounted body in the hospital morgue. By the way, this is Marta. She lives in the villa across the street. I don't think you've met each other." Rafa extended a hand. "Rafael Cardenas. I live in Miss Applebaum's apartment above Gary." "Right, you're Mendoza's old partner," she replied, shaking his hand. "Gary told me about you." "So, what's with the body?" "It has a gunshot wound to the chest, and we have no clue how it got into our morgue. No intake records, no ambulance, no ID." I assume you haven't informed the police? Rafa said. No, Marta said, gripping the arms of her chair. Dr. Rubio wanted to hit the panic button, but I stopped him. I told him to lock the morgue doors and give me an hour. I came straight here. Good, Rafa said immediately, his voice completely serious. That was a smart move. Wait, why is that smart? Gary asked, his neon blue tracksuit rustling as he leaned forward. Isn't hiding a murder victim a felony? We aren't hiding it, Gary. We're managing the fallout, Rafa explained patiently. Do you have any idea what happens if Marta calls Central Dispatch to report a homicide inside the hospital? Angela shows up and yells at everyone? Shannon guessed. Angela shows up, declares the entire hospital a primary crime scene, and locks it down, Rafa corrected. The police will have to freeze all entrances and exits. They will commandeer the security room. They will stop shift changes. They will have to interview every single doctor, nurse, orderly, and patient. It will completely paralyze the whole hospital for at least 48 hours. And it's not like San Malvino has another one of that size. Marta let out a shaky breath, burying her face in her hands. Exactly. We have a premature ICU ward. We have 2 emergency surgeries scheduled for this morning. If the police put yellow tape over the loading docks and the lobby, patients will suffer. I can't let the hospital fall apart just because someone decided to use our basement as a dumping ground. You did the right thing coming to us, Marta, Alex said gently, resting a comforting hand on the nurse's shoulder. I think Angela can deal with this quietly. Quietly? Shannon raised an eyebrow. How do you quietly investigate a gunshot victim in a hospital? We control the point of entry, Reg said, looking over at Rafa. If the uniforms get the call over the radio, it's a circus. But if the lead detective walks in through the back door, assesses the scene, and contains the perimeter to just the morgue and the freight elevators, the hospital can keep running. Rafa nodded slowly, already pulling his smartphone from his pocket. Angela hates a circus, and she hates when people play games in on her turf even more. If someone smuggled a body into that hospital, it means the killer is brazen enough to think they could bypass her entirely. She is going to be absolutely furious, Lucien muttered, looking slightly terrified. She is, Rafa agreed, dialing Mendoza, which is why she needs to hear it from me. Cardenas. Mendoza's clipped voice crackled through the speaker. It's 8 a.m. Someone better be dead or holding a hostage, because I am currently staring at a mountain of municipal paperwork. Good morning to you too, Angie, Rafa said smoothly. I am afraid I have bad news about your paperwork. It is going to have to wait. Mendoza sighed on the other end of the line. What did Gary do this time? Gary is currently wearing a neon tracksuit and behaving himself, Rafa replied, glancing back at the porch. The problem is at San Malvino General. We have an unaccounted murder victim with a gunshot wound tucked into one of their morgue drawers. No paperwork, no police report. There was a long, deeply terrifying pause on the line. Excuse me? Mendoza said, her voice dropping 20 degrees in temperature. Marta is here with us, Rafa continued, unbothered by the sudden chill. She hasn't alerted dispatch yet to protect the hospital's operational status. We need you to come to the hospital to see what's what. Another pause. When Mendoza finally spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. And I hoped we had at least one unproblematic place on this island, she sighed. I guess not. Nobody touches that body. See you at the loading dock in 10. Chapter 3. Good morning, boss, Lucien said to Mendoza as she parked the cruiser next to the ambulance bays and stepped out of the car. Is it, Lucien? Mendoza said, not breaking her stride as she approached the group waiting by the loading dock. A murder victim in a hospital. We hit a new low. She walked over to Marta. Marta, I am going to ask you this once, and I need you to be 100% certain, Mendoza said. Is there any possibility that this is one of your patients? A paperwork glitch? A floor transfer that wasn't logged properly? No, Marta said flatly. I run a very tight ship. Every unit conducts a physical head count at shift change. Every bed is accounted for. Nobody is missing. And nobody passed away last night without a doctor present. Mendoza nodded. All right, let's see the body. Reg pointed a finger at the ground near the loading doors. Bombay, stay. No dogs in a sterile area. Actually, we can drop him off at the pediatric wing on our way to the morgue, Marta said. Kids are going to love him. Bombay rolled his eyes, sighed, and padded behind them. The ride down to the basement was silent. Lucien leaned against the back wall, clutching a fresh cup of hospital coffee, watching the floor numbers tick down. "How come Gary and Shannon didn't show up?" Mendoza asked. "Not that I'm not happy about it." "Gary had a morning run with Val," Alex said, "and Shannon notoriously hates hospitals." When the elevator doors dinged open on the basement floor, the air immediately dropped 10 degrees. At the end of the hall, standing outside the heavy metal doors of the morgue, was Dr. Rubio, a short, balding man in a white coat sweating profusely. When he saw Mendoza stepping off the elevator, he looked like he might actually faint. "Detective," Dr. Rubio said, his voice cracking slightly, I have been working here for 2 decades. Nothing like this has ever happened before." "I'm sure it hasn't," Mendoza said. "Walk me through it." Rubio swiped a hand across his forehead and pushed the heavy morgue doors open. "I took over the graveyard shift at 11 p.m., he said, walking toward the wall of drawers. The evening pathologist handed over the logs. Drawers 1 and 2 were occupied by natural cause passings waiting for funeral transport. Drawers 3 through 6 were logged as empty. "If they were logged as empty, why did you open number 4? Reg asked, his eyes scanning the room. "Because the digital thermostat on the 4th bank was reading half a degree too warm," Rubio said defensively. "I went to check the internal freon valve at 5 in the morning. I pulled the handle and the body was just lying there, in a standard hospital transport bag." "Are you certain he wasn't placed there during your shift?" Rafa asked, stepping closer to the metal tables. "Absolutely certain," Rubio said. "I was either in this room or the adjoining lab all night. No one came through those doors. And more importantly, the evidence doesn't support a midnight drop-off." Mendoza crossed her arms. "Time of death?" "Yesterday," Rubio said, his professional confidence briefly overriding his panic. "Sometime in the mid to late afternoon." Alex frowned, stepping forward. "Are you sure? Doesn't the refrigeration unit slow down the decomposition process? It could distort the timeline." "It slows the onset of rigor mortis, yes," Rubio nodded. "But based on core temperature, he has been dead for at least 14 to 16 hours before I found him." A heavy silence filled the cold room. "Yesterday afternoon," Rafa repeated, looking at Reg. "The hospital is packed during the day." "It's a madhouse," Marta agreed. "Between 3 and 7 p.m., you have shift changes, outpatient discharges, and evening visiting hours. The corridors are full of doctors, orderlies, and families." "Which makes it the perfect cover," Reg noted. "If you want to move a body through a hospital without raising suspicion, you don't do it at 3 in the morning when the halls are empty. You put him on a gurney, throw a sheet over his face, and wheel him right through the afternoon crowd. Everyone just assumes he's a patient in transit." Lucien pulled his laptop out of his messenger bag, setting it down on a metal counter. "Should I call Crane? Tell him to pick up the body?" "Absolutely not," Mendoza vetoed instantly. "If the killer works here, or if they have an accomplice, coroner's van pulling up to the back doors is a giant neon sign that the body was discovered. We keep this completely contained until we know who we are dealing with. Take a picture of him and run it through our databases." She turned to Marta. "Take Lucien to the security room when he's done here." "What am I looking for?" Lucien asked, opening his laptop. "The freight elevators and the basement corridor," Mendoza instructed. "Focus on the window between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. yesterday. Look for anyone rolling anything that could fit a body down here." "Our head of security is a great guy," Marta said, already heading for the door. "I'll get us access to the servers." "Go," Mendoza said. As Marta and Lucien disappeared down the hallway, Mendoza turned back to Dr. Rubio. "All right," she said, "let's examine the body." Dr. Rubio swallowed hard and pulled down the zipper. The man on the table was in his late 30s, heavily built, with a shaved head and a thick, dark beard. Dead center in the middle of his chest was a single, dark puncture wound. 9 millimeter, Reg observed, pointing to the edges of the wound. "And look at the skin around the entry point. The powder burns are tight. Close range, Rafa agreed, stepping up next to him. The shooter was standing less than 3 feet away when they pulled the trigger. This wasn't a stray bullet. No defensive wounds on his hands or forearms, Alex noted quietly, looking at the victim's fingers. He didn't try to block the weapon. He either trusted the person who shot him, or he never saw the gun coming. Mendoza leaned closer, inspecting the man's face. I don't recognize him. He's not a frequent flyer in my lockup, and he's not one of our local gang affiliates. We need to ID him before we can figure out why he was killed. Angie, Rafa said, his voice quiet. Look at his left shoulder. Mendoza walked around the metal table. On the victim's left deltoid, wrapping slightly toward his collarbone, was a large, incredibly detailed, hyper-realistic portrait of a woman's face, styled like a vintage 1940s pinup. That is a custom work, Reg said, studying the ink. You don't get lines that clean from a scratcher in a basement. That took a highly skilled artist. And it's fresh, Alex pointed out. There's still a faint redness around the shading, and a tiny bit of medical adhesive residue near his collarbone. Mendoza pulled her phone out and snapped 3 high-resolution photos of the tattoo from different angles. I bet Shannon knows all the tattoo artists on San Malvino. It's her kind of crowd. Chapter 4. Boss, I'm looking at the basement cameras and it's a disaster down here. Lucien's voice crackled over Mendoza's phone speaker. Mendoza leaned against the metal of the autopsy table. Define disaster, Lucien. The foot traffic in there is worse than the marina on a carnival Friday night, Lucien sighed. You've got janitorial staff pushing massive rolling bins, laundry services hauling canvas carts, kitchen staff moving catering warmers. Half of these carts are big enough to hide a grown man. I'm going to have to go screen by screen to see if any of them diverted to the morgue. It's going to take a while. Take the time, Mendoza said. Did the facial recognition get a hit? It did. His name is Elian Osorio, Lucien said. But he's practically a ghost on paper. He's local, but there are no priors, no registered address, no current employment, and no listed next of kin. He hasn't paid taxes on San Malvino, ever. He doesn't look homeless, Reg noted, looking down at the heavy-set man on the table. Good muscle mass, clean teeth. And that tattoo definitely wasn't cheap. He was making cash somewhere. Keep digging into his financials, Mendoza instructed. I'm calling Shannon. She hung up and dialed a new number. It rang 3 times before connecting. Angela, Shannon whispered loudly into the phone. What's up? I need your help to find a tattoo artist, Mendoza said, confused. Why in the world are you whispering? I am hiding in the supply closet because Ms. Belvedere and Howie are about to get physical over the last tube of cadmium red, and I don't want to pick sides, Shannon whispered back. Besides, I'm not trained to break up elderly fights, and Howie said he'll make Ms. B disappear. Can you imagine? Shannon, focus. Right. What kind of ink do you want? I can suggest a few cool artists. Just don't tell me you want your badge number tattooed on your chest. That's such a cliché. Shannon, I don't want to get a tattoo, Mendoza groaned. Just check your messages, for the love of God. There was a 3-second pause. Oh, wow, Shannon said, her voice returning to its normal volume. That's an Inez Navarro piece. Who is Inez Navarro? Rafa asked. She runs a private studio downtown called the Iron Orchid, Shannon explained. She's super famous in the ink community. She only does monochrome hyperrealism, exclusively portraits. She doesn't take walk-ins, and her books are closed a year in advance. People fly into San Malvino just to get waitlisted by her. Then she keeps meticulous client records, Mendoza said. Probably, Shannon agreed. But she's notoriously private. She's not going to talk to you just because you're a cop. Just send me the address already. 10 minutes later, Mendoza parked the cruiser in front of the Iron Orchid. The studio looked more like a high-end art gallery than a tattoo parlor, with minimalist decor, frosted glass doors, and a sleek leather waiting area. She's finishing up a shading session, the receptionist said. She'll be out in 10 minutes. Reg dropped onto one of the leather sofas, flipping casually through a thick portfolio book of flash art. "What do you think, honey?" Reg asked, looking over at Alex. "Should I get your face on my chest?" "Absolutely not," Alex said, not looking up from her screen. "If you really want a portrait, Reg, get Bombay's. He earned it today." From underneath the leather sofa, Bombay let out a long, deeply tragic sigh. After a short stint in the hospital's pediatric wing, he was currently sporting 4 pink hairbands on his forehead fur, and his whole left side was sticky from spilled apple juice. "Good," Reg said, studying a hyper-realistic drawing of a pirate. "Because I don't get the appeal. It's a massive gamble. What happens when you gain weight? Suddenly, your beautiful tribute looks like Jabba the Hutt." "Not to mention the relationship aspect," Rafa agreed, leaning against the front desk. "It is a terrible idea. People change, they argue, they move on. Ink stays." The low hum of a tattoo machine in the back room finally cut off. A few moments later, a client walked out of the swinging doors holding a bandaged forearm, followed by a woman with sleeves of intricate black ink and a sharp asymmetrical haircut. She was wiping her hands with a sterile towel. "Inez Navarro?" Mendoza asked, stepping away from the wall. "That's me," Inez said, tossing the towel into a bin behind the counter. "How can I help you?" "Detective Mendoza," Mendoza said, flashing her badge and pulling up the picture of the dead man's tattoo. "I need to know about this piece." Inez leaned over the counter, studying the photo for barely 2 seconds. "Yeah, that's my work," Inez nodded. "Elian Osorio. I just finished the final shading on that 2 days ago." "What can you tell us about him?" Rafa asked. "Not a lot," Inez said, opening her scheduling laptop. "He booked the appointment exactly a year ago online, paid the deposit from a bank account in Miami. He told me he hadn't lived on San Malvino since he was a kid." Mendoza frowned. "He flew in from Miami just for a tattoo." "The ink was just step 1, Inez said. Step 2 was the girl." "The girl in the portrait?" Alex asked. "Yeah," Inez said. "We sat together for almost 8 hours over 2 days. You end up talking a lot. He told me the portrait was his high school sweetheart. He heard through the grapevine that she finally finalized her divorce a few months ago, so he booked a flight back to the island." "A grand romantic gesture," Rafa noted dryly. "He wanted to win her back," Inez shrugged. "Said he wanted to show her that he never forgot her and that he was finally ready to settle down." "Do you have a name for this high school sweetheart?" Mendoza asked. "He didn't say." Inez shook her head, just kept calling her the one that got away. "Did he say where he was staying on the island? Or who he was meeting?" Mendoza pressed. "No," Inez said. "Just that he was grabbing a drink downtown to celebrate the new ink, and then he was going to go see her." Mendoza nodded, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "If you remember anything else, call the station. Thanks for your time." "Sure thing, Detective," Inez said, already reaching for a fresh pair of gloves. The group walked out of the frosted glass doors and back onto the sunny street. Alex stalled by the car. "Am I the only one, or does the whole timeline of Elian's story feels weird?" "Let's get back home and discuss it," Reg said, opening the back door of the Jeep for Bombay. "I need a real coffee and the dog needs a bath." Chapter 5. "No shaking," Reg said, pointing a soapy finger at the pitch-black K9. "I mean it, Bombay. Think of the consequences." Bombay stood in the center of the lawn, completely soaked, covered in suds, and radiating pure misery. He locked eyes with Reg, pinned his wet ears back, and aggressively shook. A wave of soapy apple-scented water plastered Reg's t-shirt to his chest. Reg closed his eyes and let out a long, defeated sigh. From the safety of the dry porch, Alex took a serene sip of her coffee. "I told you to put on your swim shorts." "Oh, come on," Reg muttered, picking up the garden hose to rinse the foam off his arms. He's supposed to have some remnants of discipline, a decorated war vet throwing a tantrum over baby shampoo. For shame, Bombay. "I bet your tantrum would be epic if you had pink hairbands in your beard and apple juice spilled all over you," Rafa grinned, leaning against the porch railing. Now, what was the timeline issue that was bothering you at the tattoo parlor, Alex? The booking, Alex said, setting her mug down on the table. Inez said Elian booked that portrait appointment a year ago, but he supposedly didn't find out his high school sweetheart was getting divorced until a few months ago. So? Reg asked, walking up the porch steps and grabbing a towel. Maybe Inez just misremembered the dates. It happens all the time. No, Inez looked right at her scheduling software, Rafa said, taking a sip of his coffee. You can't fake a digital timestamp. The deposit was paid 12 months ago. Okay, so he's a stalker, Reg said, aggressively drying his hair. He's a creep who booked a massive portrait of a married woman he hadn't seen in a decade. But if he's a stalker, why fly in now? Mendoza asked, leaning against the porch post. If he booked the ink a year ago, it means he planned to come back to San Malvino long before the divorce was even filed. The divorce rumor didn't trigger the tattoo. The tattoo was already happening. People do crazy things for love, Rafa offered, crossing his arms. Maybe he was just holding out hope, or maybe he wanted the tattoo regardless of her marital status. I don't buy it. Alex shook her head. A massive, hyper-realistic tattoo takes hours of physical pain and costs, I believe, a lot. You don't book something like that on a whim just to surprise a married ex. What if she rejects him? Then he's stuck with her face on his arm forever. The psychology of it is completely backward. Alex is right, Reg agreed, tossing the damp towel onto the back of a wicker chair. You don't brand yourself with someone else's face unless you are absolutely sure about the outcome, or unless you are deeply grieving. Mendoza looked over at Rafa. I agree, Mendoza said gently. You stayed in Cuba for 20 years for the love of your life. You gave up everything for Elena, but you never walked into a parlor and got her face tattooed on your shoulder. Rafa's expression softened for a fraction of a second at the mention of the name. He looked down at the wooden floorboards before he gave a slow nod. You make a fair point, he said. Everyone carries their grief differently, but getting the ink a year before she was even available is a massive logical flaw. So if he didn't come back just to sweep a divorced woman off her feet, why did he end up dead in a hospital basement? Reg asked. Those two things don't line up. Maybe they do, Alex said, leaning forward. What if the sweetheart works at San Malvino General? Or maybe her ex-husband works there, Reg threw out, his brain spinning up. Hospitals have doctors. Doctors have money. What if Elian showed up to win her back, got into a physical altercation with the jealous ex-husband, got shot, and the ex-husband used his staff access to hide the body in the morgue? That is a lot of what-ifs for a murder case, Reg, Mendoza sighed, though she was already pulling her phone out of her pocket. But it's the best working theory we have, to understand what happened to Elian in the last 48 hours. We have to find this woman. If she or her ex-husband work at that hospital, we have our prime suspects. Mendoza dialed Lucien's number and put it on speaker. Tell me you have a suspect sneaking a body into the morgue, Mendoza said when the line clicked open. I have a migraine, boss. Lucien's exhausted voice came from the speaker. I've got 2 janitors taking suspiciously long smoke breaks, a broken laundry cart, and a guy delivering a massive shipment of saline. I also just watched an orderly drop a tray of lime jello, look both ways, and kick it under a vending machine. But so far, nobody entering the morgue. I'm still scrubbing the 6 o'clock hour. That hospital basement is basically Grand Central Station on steroids. Leave the footage alone for a minute, Mendoza said. Can you pull up the local high school yearbooks from 20 years ago? Find Elian Osorio's senior class. High school yearbooks? Lucien groaned. Are we running a homicide investigation or planning a class reunion? Just do it, Lucien, Mendoza snapped. We need a name. Hang on, Lucien sighed. The rapid, aggressive clacking of a mechanical keyboard echoed through the speaker. Down on the lawn, Bombay immediately dropped to the wet grass and started rolling furiously, kicking up small clouds of dust to completely undo his bath. Reg watched him for 3 seconds, then just stared blankly at the sky. Got it, Lucienne said. Honestly, our local school district has terrible cybersecurity. I didn't even have to bypass a firewall. I just emailed the PDF of the yearbook to your phone, boss. Mendoza opened her email and tapped the attachment. Alex, Reg, and Rafa crowded around her as the digital pages of a 20-year-old high school yearbook loaded on the small screen. "This is him," Rafa said, pointing at a picture of a much younger, beardless Elian Osorio. "He looked so happy," Alex murmured, studying the photo. "Okay, let's check the clubs. The tattoo was styled like a 1940s pinup. Look at the drama department or the history club." Mendoza swiped rapidly through the pages, blowing past the mathletes, the varsity sports teams, and the student council. She stopped when she hit the school plays. The page was filled with black and white photos of a student production of Guys and Dolls. "There," Alex pointed to the bottom corner of the screen. Standing in the center of the cast photo was a teenage girl with dark, curled hair, wearing a vintage dress and dark lipstick. Even in the grainy yearbook print, it was an exact, undeniable match for the face inked on Elian Osorio's shoulder. "Mariana Vargas," Mendoza read the name printed beneath the photo. "All right, so Elian Osorio and Mariana Vargas," Reg said. "Class of 2006. If she just got divorced, there should be a recent civil filing on the mainland or here on the island." Mendoza tapped the speaker icon on her phone. "Lucienne, we got her. Run the name Mariana Vargas through the property databases and the family court records. I need her current address and her ex-husband's name." "Mariana Vargas," Lucienne repeated. The keyboard clacked rapidly. The porch went quiet as they waited. Rafa took another slow sip of his coffee. Alex picked up her coffee mug. The typing abruptly stopped. "Well?" Mendoza prompted. "Where does she live? Is there an ex-husband?" "Boss," Lucienne said, his voice completely stripped of its usual sarcasm, "there is no ex-husband, and she doesn't have an address." Mendoza frowned, exchanging a confused look with Reggie. "Did she move from the island?" "No," Lucienne said quietly. "She died 20 years ago." Chapter 6. "Are you sure it's the same Mariana Vargas?" Rafa asked. "Positive," Lucienne replied. "Date of birth matches her high school records. She died the summer after they graduated." "How?" Alex asked. "Give me a second. I'm pulling the old police report," Lucienne said. The keyboard clacked again. "Car crash. She was a new driver. Her car went off the cliff road on the North Shore. Pronounced dead at the scene. It was ruled a tragic accident. Closed case." Wait. Reg stood up from his chair. "If she died 20 years ago, then who the hell recently got divorced? Why did Elian fly back here?" "Did someone steal her identity?" Rafa threw out. "Maybe he found out someone was using her name?" "Or maybe he was just lying," Alex said slowly, leaning back in her chair. "To the tattoo artist?" Reg frowned. "Why? Inez sat with him for 8 hours. Why make up a whole story about a high school sweetheart getting divorced?" "Because the truth is exhausting," Alex explained. "Think about it. You're sitting in a chair, you're in a lot of physical pain, and a complete stranger asks you what your tattoo means. Are you going to trauma dump about a 20-year-old fatal car crash? Or are you going to give them a generic, happy cover story so they stop asking questions?" "It's a defense mechanism," Rafa nodded, understanding immediately. "People are deeply protective of their grief. He wanted to commemorate her, but he didn't want to share her sad story with a stranger." "Okay, fine," Mendoza said, throwing her hands up in frustration. "He lied to the artist. That explains the divorce plot hole. But where does that leave us? We have absolutely nothing." "We have a dead guy in a morgue," Reg pointed out. "A dead guy and no clues," Mendoza said, pacing the length of the porch. "Why did Elian come back from Miami and get the tattoo now, 20 years after the crash? And how did he wind up dead in the hospital basement? We don't have a single thread to pull on." She stopped pacing and looked down at the phone on the table. "Lucienne, send me that police report. Maybe something in it will point in the right direction." "Just forwarded it," Lucienne said. Mendoza tapped her screen. Reg and Rafa stepped closer, leaning in to look over her shoulder. "This is a joke," Mendoza said, her voice shifting from frustrated to furious. "This isn't a police report. It's barely half a page of actual text." Reg squinted at the screen. "Where is the accident reconstruction? Did they measure the skid marks on the asphalt to calculate her speed?" "Blank," Mendoza said, scrolling down. "Who called the police?" Alex asked. "There is no caller listed," Mendoza read. "No time of dispatch. No log of when the first responder arrived. It just says, 'Vehicle located at the bottom of the North Shore Ravine. Driver deceased upon arrival.'" "What about the vehicle itself?" Rafa frowned. "Did they check the brake lines? Was it a mechanical failure?" "Nothing." Mendoza swiped to the second page of the report form, which was mostly empty. "No mechanical inspection, no toxicology screen, no blood alcohol level. The reporting officer just ticked the box for accidental death and closed the file." "That is insane," Reg said, crossing his arms. "A teenager dies going off a cliff and they don't even check to see if she was drinking or if someone ran her off the road?" "This is exactly what I had to deal with when I just transferred here." Mendoza scowled, rubbing her temples. "The old guard on this island treated paperwork as a loose suggestion, and, well, we all know where their boss Rudy ended up." "Angie, that isn't just lazy paperwork," Rafa interrupted her. Mendoza looked at him. "I've seen my share of lazy cops in Havana," Rafa said. "Lazy cops hate to do the actual work, but they still fill out the boxes so they don't lose their pensions. They make up weather conditions, they guess the speed, leaving the caller blank, skipping a routine talk screen on a dead teenager." Rafa shook his head. "That is intentional. Someone sanitized this report. Besides, the coroner wouldn't skip a talk screen unless he was specifically asked." Alex nodded. "It's not a complicated procedure at all." "So y'all are suggesting it's a cover-up?" Reg asked. "It has to be," Rafa said. "And if we can see the holes in this report 20 years later, maybe Elian saw them too." "So Elian knew her death wasn't just a tragic accident," Reg theorized, pacing a slow circle around the patio table. "He flew back to the island to ask the questions the police never asked, and somebody realized he's getting too close." "But why now?" Alex asked. 20 years ago he was just a kid. Maybe now he had means for a private investigation." Rafa shrugged. "Who knows?" "Her parents would know the real story," Mendoza said and turned to the phone. "Lucian, look up the Vargas family. Does Mariana have any living relatives on the island?" The rapid clacking of the keyboard echoed through the speaker. "Yeah," Lucien said a few seconds later. "Her parents, Hector Vargas and Sofia Morales Vargas. They still own a house in the old district, same address for the last 30 years. "Send it over," Mendoza said. "You think Elian went to see them?" Alex asked. "If he flew all the way here to commemorate their daughter or to dig into a 20-year-old cover-up, they were probably his first stop." Chapter 7. "Are you sure we shouldn't just wait in the car?" Reg asked, shifting his weight on the narrow brick walkway. 4 people showing up unannounced feels like a raid. "It's not a raid, it's a conversation," Mendoza said, raising her hand to knock on the faded blue door of the Vargas cottage. "Why are you suddenly shy?" "I'm not shy, but it's an overwhelming conversation," Reg pointed out. "I'm a large man, Angela. Rafa looks like he's about to foreclose on their mortgage, and you always look like you're ready to arrest someone. Alex is the only one who looks approachable." "Which is exactly why Alex is going to do most of the talking," Mendoza said, knocking twice. "We need them comfortable. If I come in alone waving my badge, they get defensive. If we come in together, it just looks like the neighborhood watch dropping by." The door clicked open. A woman in her late 50s stood in the doorway. She had kind, tired eyes, and her silver-streaked hair was tied back in a neat braid. She was wearing a simple linen dress, but as she reached up to open the screen door, the morning sun caught the unmistakable flash of a thick, diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. "Sofia Vargas?" Mendoza asked, her tone softening significantly. "Yes?" the woman asked, looking at the group with mild confusion. "I'm Detective Mendoza, and these are my associates, Alexandra, Reginald, and Raphael. We were hoping we could ask you a few questions, if you have a moment." Sofia didn't flinch, nor did she look at the badge for more than a second. She just offered a sad, practiced smile and stepped aside. "Of course, Detective. Please, come in. Hector is just putting the kettle on." The group stepped into the living room, and Reg immediately cast a subtle glance at Rafa. From the street, the cottage looked like every other weathered, working-class home in the old district. Inside, the disparity was striking. It wasn't flashy, but the quiet wealth was undeniable. The floorboards were covered by a pristine, hand-woven Persian rug. Heavy silk drapes framed the windows, and the bookshelves were made of rich, polished mahogany. "What a beautiful home," Alex said warmly, taking a seat on the plush sofa. "Thank you," Sophia smiled, sitting in the armchair opposite them. "We try to keep it comfortable. Hector, we have guests." Hector Vargas stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He had a gentle, weathered face, wearing a plain button-down shirt and worn khakis. "Police, Hector," Sophia said gently. "Oh," Hector said, pausing for a fraction of a second before his warm smile returned. "Can I get anyone some tea? Or water?" "We're fine, thank you, Mr. Vargas," Mendoza said. Reggie's eyes drifted to the mantel above the fireplace. Next to a framed photograph of a beautiful, dark-haired teenage girl, there was a newer photo of Hector standing on a pristine, incredibly well-manicured golf green. "Is that the Royal K course on the mainland?" Reg asked, gesturing to the photo. "I've heard the wait list just to play around there is a few months long." Hector chuckled, walking over to sit beside his wife. "It was a retirement gift to myself. A once-in-a-lifetime trip. I'm afraid my swing didn't quite live up to the green fees, though." "Well, you look like you were having fun," Alex smiled. "We are very sorry to intrude on your morning. We know it's never pleasant when the police show up at your door." "We are always happy to help, but I'm not sure what we can tell you," Sophia said, her eyes drifting toward the photo of the teenage girl on the mantel. "If this is about Mariana, it's been 20 years. We've made our peace with it as best as any parent can." "I can't even imagine," Alex said softly, her voice full of empathy. "We actually came to ask about a friend of hers, Elian Osorio." Sophia's face softened instantly. "Oh, Elian. Such a sweet, sweet boy." "He was Mariana's first real boyfriend," Hector added, patting his wife's hand. "They were inseparable. He practically lived at this house during their senior year." "They loved each other very much," Sophia smiled, a nostalgic look in her eyes. "I used to joke that I was feeding him more than his own mother did. He had a wonderful heart." "When was the last time you saw him?" Rafa asked politely, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Oh, it's been 20 years," Sophia sighed, the smile fading into a shadow. "His parents moved the family to Miami right after the kids graduated. We haven't spoken to him since." "That must have been difficult," Alex noted. "Did his family move to Miami before or after Mariana's accident?" Sophia blinked and looked at Hector. "You know, I don't really remember," Hector said smoothly, offering an apologetic shrug. "That whole summer was just a terrible, dark blur for us. We weren't really keeping track of the neighborhood gossip." "But surely he attended the funeral?" Rafa asked, his tone perfectly conversational. "If they were inseparable, I imagine he would have been devastated." "It's hard to say," Sophia said quickly, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. "There were so many people there. The whole high school came out. I barely remember who I spoke to that day." "Of course," Alex said gently, expertly diffusing the slight tension. "Trauma does terrible things to our memory. It's completely understandable." Mendoza took over, keeping her voice neutral. "Can you tell us about the crash itself? I was reviewing the old records this morning, and the police report is fairly sparse. It just noted that Mariana was a new driver." Hector's posture slumped. He looked down at his hands. "That was my fault," Hector said quietly. "She was driving my old sedan that night. The brakes were always a little touchy and the steering pulled to the right. I never should have let her take it out on that cliff road in the dark. She just didn't have the experience to handle it." "You couldn't have known, Hector," Sophia whispered, squeezing his hand and resting her head against his shoulder. Old sedans can be a nightmare, Reg agreed sympathetically. Did you tell the reporting officer about the brake lines pulling to the right? Usually they document mechanical failures, so the insurance companies don't fight the claim. I don't think so, Hector stammered slightly, looking at Reggie. I was in shock. I wasn't thinking about insurance claims or police reports. I just lost my little girl. Right, of course, Reg nodded, backing off immediately. Stupid question. Forgive me. It's fine, Hector said, taking a deep breath and sitting up straighter. But I don't understand what any of this has to do with Elian. Why are you asking about him after all this time? We have reason to believe Elian recently returned to the island, Mendoza said carefully. Are you absolutely certain you haven't seen him? He didn't accidentally come by in the last 48 hours? Positive, Hector said, looking Mendoza directly in the eye without blinking. Why? Is the boy in some kind of trouble? He was murdered last night, Mendoza said bluntly. Sophia let out a sharp, devastated gasp. Both of her hands flew to her mouth. Ay, Dios! Sophia cried out, her voice trembling. That poor boy! He had such a wonderful heart. He was so full of life. This is absolutely devastating. Who would do such a thing to him? He was like a son to us, Hector added, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped an arm tightly around his weeping wife. A tragedy, detective. An absolute tragedy. I wish to God we could help you, but I swear to you, we haven't seen or heard from him since that summer. I see, Mendoza said, standing up. I apologize for delivering such terrible news. We just had to be sure. We understand, Hector said grimly. Please, if you find out who did this to him, let us know. He deserves justice. We will, Rafa said, offering a polite nod. Thank you for your time, Mr. Vargas, Mendoza said. If you remember anything else about his move to Miami, please call the station. I will. Chapter 8. Can anyone explain why their grief felt somehow both real and fake? Reg said, the moment they were out of earshot from the Vargas cottage. Every time we asked a question, she cried. It was like someone cued the music. It was the timeline that bothered me, Alex said, shaking her head. They supposedly loved Elian like a son, but they couldn't remember if his family moved to Miami before or after their daughter died. You don't forget the timeline of the worst month of your life. Not to mention the sudden influx of cash, Rafa agreed, walking with his hands in his pockets. Royal K golf trips and custom French stoves don't come cheap. They are living like retired executives, not working-class islanders. Mendoza pulled her phone out. I'm calling Lucien. I want to see their tax returns from the last 20 years, and then we start knocking on neighbors' doors to see if anyone saw Elian around here. Rafa reached out and gently pushed Mendoza's phone down. If you go door to door flashing your badge, they will close ranks, he said. People in these old neighborhoods don't like talking to the police. They like talking to each other. Rafa pointed down the sunlit street to the corner. A small bakery had a ventanita, an open walk-up window, facing the sidewalk. 3 older women in bright, breezy dresses were leaning against the counter, fanning themselves, holding tiny paper cups of cafecito, and talking a mile a minute. Instead of interrogating, we buy a round of coffee and we listen. Reggie's eyes instantly locked onto the glass display case behind the window, which was stacked high with flaky golden pastries. Are those guava and cheese pastelitos I see there? Reg asked, his voice full of deep, profound longing. They are, Rafa smiled. Finally, a chance for a proper and very late breakfast, he said, giving a side-eye to Alex. Alex just rolled her eyes. As they approached the ventanita, the 3 women paused their rapid-fire gossip to eye the newcomers. Rafa stepped right up to the window, effortlessly turning on his charm up to 10. Buenos dias, señoras. I'm Rafael, Rafa said, offering a polite nod. It is a beautiful morning. Could I impose on you to share this window with us? And please let me buy your next round of cafecitos. The women exchanged a look, immediately melting to Rafa's old-school manners. You can buy the coffee, but we are paying for our own pastries, señor, the woman in the center said. She had a colorful silk scarf tied around her hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. I'm Alma. This is Gloria and Beatriz. Raphael, he said, ordering a round of espressos and a large box of assorted pastries from the window attendant. When the box arrived, Reg immediately took a warm guava pastelito and took a massive bite. He closed his eyes, looking like a man who had just found religion. Beatriz nudged Alma and muttered something in rapid Spanish, gesturing to Reg with her paper cup. Alma laughed loudly. Your friend has a very good appetite. El gringo gordito. Reg opened his eyes, chewing happily. This gringo speaks pretty good Spanish, ladies, and I know what gordito means. But honestly, for a pastelito this good, I don't even mind. The women laughed, completely disarmed by Reggie's total lack of ego. So, Raphael, Alma said, stirring her tiny cup of espresso, you don't look like you're from this neighborhood. Are you looking to buy? No, just taking a walk with my friends, Rafa said smoothly. We were actually just admiring the Vargas house down the street, the blue cottage. It looks beautifully maintained. Gloria scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Ha! Maintained. They think they are so fancy now with their silk drapes and their imported rugs. They don't even say good morning when they walk to the market, Beatriz agreed, shaking her head. Ever since they got that money, they act like they don't know us. Mendoza leaned against the counter, casually holding her coffee. Did they inherit the money recently? Recently? No, Alma said, leaning in, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. It was 20 years ago, right after their poor daughter Mariana passed away. God rest her soul. It was a terrible tragedy, Alex said softly. We heard she drove her father's old car off the cliff. All three women stopped drinking their coffee and stared at Alex in total silence. Who told you that? Gloria asked, her brow furrowing. Just some gossip we heard, Reg said, finishing his pastry and reaching for a second one. Alma let out a sharp, genuine bark of laughter. Hector Vargas hasn't owned a car in his entire life before getting rich. The bank wouldn't even give him a loan for a scooter. Mendoza froze. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure, Beatriz said indignantly. He worked at the cannery back then. He rode this terrible, rusty green bicycle to work every single day. Squeak, squeak, squeak down the street at 5 a.m. Drove my dog completely crazy. Unlike my grandson, who sleeps until noon and doesn't work at all, Gloria complained. I tell him, you have to get up, you have to… Wait, Alex interrupted gently, steering the conversation back. So if Hector didn't own a car, whose car was Mariana driving that night? Nobody knows, Alma shrugged. The police came, they told Hector and Sofia she went off the cliff, and they closed the coffin. It was a closed casket funeral. Did her boyfriend attend the funeral? Rafa asked. Elian Osorio? The mention of Elian's name caused another immediate ripple of reaction among the women. Beatriz crossed her arms and shook her head in disapproval. No, Beatriz said. He didn't even come to the church. Because his parents dragged him away, Alma clarified. The Osorio family lived 2 streets over. 3 days after the accident, in the absolute dead of night, they packed their bags and left the island. Didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't even put the house on the market properly. They just vanished, poof, like ghosts. Fled like criminals, Gloria muttered. And then, a month later, the contractors started showing up at Hector's house. Contractors? Mendoza asked. Oh, yes, Alma nodded, but Hector and Sofia were sneaky about it. They made the construction crews park in the back alley and bring all the materials in through the kitchen door so nobody on the street would see what they were doing. But we aren't blind. You can't hide a marble countertop from the neighborhood. We saw the boxes from that fancy French stove, Beatriz added. Cost more than my entire house. Rafa set his empty espresso cup on the counter. Ladies, you have been incredibly helpful. Thank you for the coffee. Anytime, Raphael, Alma smiled warmly. She pointed a finger at Reg. You come back anytime, Gordito. We'll save you a cheese roll. You can count on that, Reg said, holding the pastry box to his chest. Chapter 9. "What are you thinking?" Reg asked as they walked away from the Ventanita, finishing the last bite of his guava pastelito and brushing the flaky crumbs off his shirt. "I'm thinking someone paid the Vargases off not to make too much noise around their daughter's accident," Mendoza said, unlocking the doors to her cruiser. "And Elian was the linchpin. Either he knew exactly who was in the car with Mariana that night, or it was Elian himself behind the wheel. His parents paid the Vargases off, packed their bags, and whisked him away to Miami before the police could ask any real questions." "That's a viable theory," Rafa said, pulling the door shut. "If the Osorio family had capital, they could have bought his way out of a vehicular manslaughter charge. They buy off the grieving parents, they buy off the local police, and they relocate. Out of sight, out of mind." "Except it wasn't out of mind for Elian," Reg said, getting into the passenger seat. "I can't get it out of my head. A kid dies, a tragic accident, and instead of finding out who to blame, her own parents decide to treat her death like a business transaction. They sold the justice their daughter deserved for a marble countertop and a trip to a golf course." "It's a different kind of poverty," Alex said softly from the back seat. "When you're that desperate, when you live on the edge for that long, the morality shifts. They didn't see it as something immoral. They probably saw it as a settlement. Out-of-court settlements happen all the time." "Not for a murder," Rafa said. "And it doesn't make it any less sick," Reg muttered. "I can't even imagine what I would do if something like this happened to Jolene. The level of guilt you'd have to bury to walk around for 20 years pretending you aren't living on blood money." "That's why they were so eager to play the role of the grieving parents with us and why Hector lied about the car," Rafa added. "They've had 2 decades to rehearse that performance. They aren't mourning Mariana anymore. They're mourning the life they'd have to give up if the truth came out." "Do you think Elian came back for redemption?" Alex asked. "Or he came back to confront the person who was actually driving," Reg offered. "Who knows?" "We'll never know," Mendoza said, starting the engine. "And honestly, right now, it doesn't matter. The important thing is the logistics. A dead man from Miami doesn't just accidentally end up in a drawer at San Malvino General. It's a highly specific dumping ground. We need to find out if the Vargases are connected to the hospital somehow." They found Marta behind the central nurse's station, looking as though she hadn't slept since the previous shift. "Please tell me you didn't find another body," she said, flipping through a medical history folder. "Just the one, Marta," Mendoza said, stopping at the desk. "We need to know if the name Vargas, Hector, or Sofia appears anywhere in your staff payroll or volunteer registry, past or present." Marta frowned, tapping her chin with the end of her pen. "Vargas? No, the name doesn't ring a bell, but I've only been back at this hospital for a year. If they were staff before that, I wouldn't know them. I don't really know the old guard." "Could you pull the evening shift schedule?" Mendoza asked. "Maybe we'll find some clues there." Marta nodded and turned to the station computer. She keyed in her credentials, and a colorful grid of names and shift blocks appeared on the monitor. "The evening shift is a skeleton crew," Marta explained, her finger tracing the screen. "No one wants to take a shift that's neither here nor there." "I wouldn't want to work evening shift either. Cuts your regular day in half." Mendoza took a photo of the screen with her phone. "Let's go find Lucien." The cramped, windowless security room was vibrating with the hum of server racks. As they pushed the door open, Lucien launched himself out of his chair. "Boss, get over here. I was already going to call you. You won't believe what I found." Mendoza strode to the bank of monitors, with Rafa, Reg, Alex, and Marta crowding behind her. "What is it?" Mendoza asked. "I found him," Lucien said, his voice dropping into a breathless whisper. "I found Elian Osorio." Mendoza frowned. "In the basement?" "No," Lucien said, pointing to the main screen. "Walking into the hospital last night. I got bored scrubbing the basement footage and started watching the main entrance. You're not going to believe this." He hit a key, and the video playback filled the screen. The date stamp read 8:15 p.m. Elian Osorio walked into the frame with a man about his age in hospital scrubs. "So he was alive when he got here?" Reg asked. "That doesn't make sense." "And he definitely knew the guy he was talking to," Rafa said, leaning in. "They're walking like they're old friends." "They're heading straight for the elevators," Mendoza said. Where do they go from there? That's the thing, Lucien said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. They step into the elevator, the doors close, and I can't find him exiting on any floor. Mendoza stared at the frozen image of the man walking beside Elian. Marta, she said, do you recognize the man with Elian? Marta leaned in, her eyes focusing on the monitor. She stared at the man's face for a long, silent moment. Her expression shifted from curiosity to a realization. I know exactly who that is. Chapter 10. Who? Mendoza asked. Victor Solis, Marta said, her voice dropping as she stared at the man on the screen. He's a pathology tech. He works the graveyard shift down in the basement with Dr. Rubio. The graveyard shift, Alex repeated. Marta nodded, pointing at the timestamp on the video. Which is why this doesn't make any sense. His shift starts at 11 p.m. Why is he walking into the main lobby at 8:15 in the evening? And why is he walking in with a dead man in waiting? Reg added. Lucian, show me the footage of that elevator from all the floors, Mendoza said, sitting down in front of the screen. I checked 3 times already. It doesn't stop anywhere. Lucian's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the internal camera feeds. It shows up empty on the ground floor 10 minutes later. See for yourself. Mendoza looked at the changing shots of the elevator doors with the same timestamp and turned to Marta. Does that elevator stop anywhere else? The attic, Marta said instantly. It's a technical floor. It's mostly massive HVAC units, boiler pipes, and a storage space for broken beds and defunct heart monitors. It's completely dead space. Are there cameras up there? Reg asked. No, Marta shook her head. Just maintenance access. Nobody goes up there unless a pipe bursts. So Victor walks him into the elevator at 8:15. Reg crossed his arms, takes him up to a deserted, soundproofed technical floor and puts a bullet in his chest. But why? We'll think of it later, Mendoza said. Are there any old gurneys he could use in the attic? Plenty of them, Marta said. So he sits up there in the dark till 11, Rafa said, picking up the thread. Then rolls Elian out on an old gurney and clocks in. Right past Dr. Rubio, Mendoza said, and tucks him into drawer number 4 before Rubio even gets changed, Reg finished. Pretty smart. It's a perfect closed loop. No witnesses, no cameras on the kill floor, and he uses his own job description as camouflage. But what did Victor Solis have to do with Elian? Alex stared at the frozen screen, deep in thought. If Elian left San Malvino right after high school, he must be an old friend. Lucian, check Victor against that yearbook you sent me. Got it. Victor Solis. He was in the drama club with Mariana and on the soccer team with Elian. That's quite a mix of interests, Reg muttered. And it's not soccer, it's football, Rafa groaned. How many times do I have to tell you? Yeah, whatever. I don't like either. Lucien rolled his eyes. Can we get back to the murder? Look at that picture, Alex said, pointing at the photo from the drama class. He's not even pretending to look at the photographer. He's just staring at her. Classic teenage obsession, Reg said, and Mariana chose Elian over him. Then she died, Elian's family fled to Miami, Vargas's suddenly get rich. And while everyone else moved on, ran away, or got paid off, Victor stayed right here, Rafa said, working the graveyard shift in a hospital basement. He became the silent guardian of her memory, Alex sighed. Think about it. If Elian came back to confess or to blow the whistle on the Vargas's cover-up, it would drag Mariana's name through the mud. She wouldn't be a pure, tragic victim anymore. She'd be the center of a dirty, 20-year-old secret. Victor didn't want justice, Mendoza realized, her eyes narrowing. He wanted preservation. He killed Elian to keep the secret buried and keep Mariana's memory exactly the way he wanted it. But how did Victor even know Elian was back on the island? Marta asked. Elian must have called his old friend, Alex said. I've talked to him many times, Marta said, her voice hollow as she watched the screen. I hand off death certificates to him sometimes. He's always so quiet. He brings his own coffee, reads paperback novels in the break room. I never would have guessed. The quiet ones who hold grudges are the most dangerous, Rafa said. They live entirely inside their own heads. Mendoza turned away from the screen. Marta, if Victor works the graveyard shift, does that mean he clocked out at 7 this morning? Marta took the keyboard from Lucien and started typing. Let me check. No, she said a minute later. He clocked in at 10:45 last night, but there's no punch-out time. Did he forget? Lucien asked. The system flags missed punch-outs automatically at the end of the shift. Marta shook her head. He didn't forget. He never left. He's still logged into the building. He's cleaning up, Reg said quietly. Everyone looked at Reg. He shot a guy in the chest at close range, Reg explained. There's going to be blood splatter, shell casings, bloody clothes. Shootings are never pretty. He couldn't clean it up last night because he had to get the body down to the morgue and work his entire shift, so he waited until this morning, and now he's probably back upstairs. Lucien, check the cameras near elevator 3 for this morning, Mendoza said. Lucien's fingers danced over the keys. Scrubbing 7 a.m., shift change. The lobby is packed. Doctors coming in, night shift leaving. Watch the elevator, Reg said. There, Lucien pointed. 7:14 a.m., Victor gets in. Cleaning supplies, Reg said, pointing at Victor's hands. Bleach, scrub brushes. He's going back to clean up. Has he come down since? Mendoza asked. Lucien fast-forwarded the feed at 8 times speed, watching the timecode blur. He stopped at the current time. No, he's still up there. Angie, Rafa said, turning to Mendoza. Are you going to lock down the hospital? If he realizes we're onto him, he could panic. We have hundreds of patients in this building. If I call a lockdown, alarms will go off. Mendoza shook her head. I'm not giving him a 10-minute head start, and I am absolutely not turning this into a hostage situation on a patient floor. So what's the play? Reg asked, unzipping his jacket to access his own weapon. Let's go. We don't need a lockdown, Mendoza said, pushing the door open and stepping out into the hallway. We know exactly where he is. Chapter 11. Do you think he's going to shoot at us when the doors open? Lucien asked, his eyes glued to the illuminated floor numbers ticking upward. Are you worried, Lucien? Rafa asked, leaning casually against the metal wall of the freight elevator. I'm just asking for logistical purposes, Lucien said, awkwardly patting his right hip. Because I might have left my gun at home. Again. Mendoza closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath. How do you keep forgetting your weapon? You are a sworn officer of the law. I'm a digital forensics specialist, Lucien moaned. My natural reflex in a crisis is to grab my laptop, not a Glock. I still haven't gotten used to the fact that sometimes I actually have to do police work. Don't worry about it, kid, Reg said, keeping his eyes on the elevator doors. You won't need it. Killing someone in cold blood is incredibly difficult if you aren't a psychopath. The adrenaline dump after pulling the trigger for the first time usually leaves a normal person completely paralyzed. He's right, Mendoza agreed, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer. If Victor was a cold-hearted killer, he would be on a ferry to the mainland by now. He wouldn't have clocked into his shift, and he certainly wouldn't be hiding in the attic 12 hours later trying to scrub blood out of the floorboards. He's probably terrified. Great, Lucien muttered. Terrified people with guns are my favorite demographic. The elevator car jerked to a sudden, heavy stop. The mechanical bell dinged, and the heavy metal doors slid open. The attic of San Malvino General was exactly as Marta had described it, a massive, sprawling dead space. It was lit only by a few flickering fluorescent tubes, casting long, eerie shadows across the concrete floor. The air was thick with dust, and the deafening, continuous hum of the hospital's industrial HVAC units. Everywhere they looked, there were towering piles of discarded medical history. Defunct monitors sat next to mountains of broken wheelchairs, and rusty IV poles were clustered together like a sad skeletal forest. And I thought Gary liked to collect all kinds of junk, Reg whispered, stepping out of the elevator and scanning the chaotic sightlines. This place is a tactical nightmare. Too many blind corners. Stay close, stay quiet, Mendoza instructed, drawing her weapon. They moved slowly through the maze of discarded equipment, their footsteps echoing faintly over the roar of the ventilation fans. Suddenly, Reg's foot caught on something soft in the shadows. He stumbled, catching his balance just as a pale, lifeless face stared up at him from the floor. "Whoa! Freeze!" Reg hissed, patting himself for a gun. "Do not move!" Lucien let out a strangled yelp and grabbed the back of Reg's t-shirt. Mendoza spun around, aiming her weapon at the floor. In the dim light, the blank plastic eyes of a 1980s CPR dummy stared blankly back at them. "It is a plastic dummy, Reg," Rafa grinned. "It doesn't have arms, Rafa." Reg defended himself, his heart rate visibly spiking. In the dark, it looked like a dismembered casualty. Who just leaves a torso on the floor? "Reg, focus," Mendoza whispered sharply, waving them forward. They kept moving, navigating around a wall of defunct heart monitors. Rafa, who had been scanning the perimeter, suddenly slowed down, locking his eyes onto a pile of junk in the corner. "Fascinating," Rafa murmured to himself. He reached out, brushing the dust off a massive stainless steel machine with several exposed chrome levers. "Rafa!" Mendoza hissed over her shoulder. "What are you doing?" "Angie, look at this," Rafa whispered back, completely captivated. "It's an original mid-century Fema E61 espresso machine from the old cafeteria. Look at the chrome group heads on this beauty." "I don't care about the chrome," Mendoza snapped quietly. "We are clearing a room for a homicide suspect." I know," Rafa said, reluctantly stepping away from it but looking back over his shoulder. "But it has a dual boiler, Angie. Do you think we could ask Marta later to give it to me? Or at least let me buy it off the hospital? I would love to repair it. It would look absolutely incredible sitting next to my samovar." "If you don't leave that coffee machine alone right now," Mendoza threatened, her eyes narrowing in the dark, "I am going to shoot you myself." Okay. Rafa raised his hands in surrender, jogging a few steps to catch back up with the group. "I'm just saying, it's a waste of good engineering." Mendoza shook her head, turning back to the maze of junk. She stopped abruptly, holding her hand up in a closed fist. Reg stopped instantly. Lucien bumped into Reg's back. "What is it?" Lucien whispered. "Bleach," Mendoza said softly. The sharp, stinging scent of industrial chemicals was cutting through the dusty, stagnant air. It was coming from the far side of the attic, behind a row of towering metal filing cabinets. Reg caught Mendoza's eye and nodded and pivoted around the filing cabinets. "San Malvino police! Drop your weapon!" Mendoza yelled, her voice cutting through the hum of the HVAC units. But there was no weapon to drop. Victor Solis, a thin, pale man in his late 30s, was sitting on the concrete floor between two broken hospital beds. He wasn't wearing his scrubs anymore. He was in a dark t-shirt and jeans. An open bottle of bleach sat on the floor next to a bright yellow sponge, completely untouched. Victor wasn't trying to clean the floor. He was curled forward, his knees pulled up to his chest, clutching a damp, wrinkled copy of a 20-year-old high school yearbook. He was sobbing. "Victor Solis?" Mendoza asked, her tone faltering slightly. Victor didn't look up. He just rocked back and forth, burying his face in his hands, his tears dripping onto the open pages of the yearbook. "He was going to ruin it!" Victor choked out, his voice cracking. "He was going to ruin everything!" "Well," Reg sighed, "this is very anticlimactic." Lucien peeked out from behind Reg's broad shoulders. "Is he shooting at us?" "No, Lucien," Rafa said. "He is having a nervous breakdown." Chapter 12. The only interrogation room at the San Malvino police station was a masterclass in psychological discomfort, stripped entirely of any Caribbean warmth. Painted a soul-crushing shade of beige, the windowless box smelled permanently of industrial pine cleaner. There were 2 metal chairs and a table. Mendoza always made sure the suspect got the wobbly chair. Victor Solis sat, his hands cuffed and resting on the metal surface. He was shivering, his dark t-shirt covered in dust from the hospital attic. Mendoza dropped a plastic cup of water onto the table. It sloshed slightly, breaking the silence. "Let's talk about last night," Mendoza said, pulling out the chair opposite him. "Elian Osorio has been gone for 2 decades. Why did he reach out to you?" Victor stared at the water cup, his pale face tight. "He sent me a message online a few days ago, said he was coming and wanted to catch up. He said I was the only person from high school he felt like he could still look in the eye." "Where did you meet?" "We went to a bar down the street from the hospital," Victor whispered. The wobbly chair clacked against the linoleum as he shifted his weight. He kept buying rounds. He was drinking like a man stepping up to the gallows, kept saying he needed liquid courage to do what he came here to do. Mendoza leaned forward. "Which was what?" "He came to turn himself in," Victor said, looking up. His eyes were bloodshot and rimmed with red. He unbuttoned his shirt and showed me this massive portrait of Mariana on his left shoulder. He said it was his penance, a reminder of what he did to her. "What did he do, Victor?" Mendoza asked, her voice perfectly even. Victor's hands began to shake against the metal table. "He killed her. He told me the whole story right there in the booth. Mariana was driving Elian's sports car that night. He thought it would be fun to let her take the wheel on the cliff road. She took a turn too fast and rolled it." "And Elian?" "He got thrown clear," Victor spat out, a sudden venomous hatred flaring in his voice. Not a single scratch on him, but instead of calling for an ambulance, he panicked. He called his father. The Osorios were rich. They dragged Elian home, paid Hector and Sofia Vargas enough money to retire, and bought off the police to falsify the report so Elian wouldn't face manslaughter charges. The room went dead silent. The ugly truth of the 20-year-old mystery finally laid bare under the buzzing fluorescent light. "A teenage girl dies in the dirt, and everyone involved cashes a check," Lucien murmured in utter disgust. "Exactly," Victor pleaded, looking at him for validation. "Her own parents sold her out. The people who were supposed to protect her just took the money and moved on." Mendoza didn't blink. "So, if Elian came back to confess and expose the Vargases, why stop him? Why put a bullet in his chest? If he goes to the police, the people who covered up Mariana's death finally go to prison." Victor let out a hollow, bitter laugh. He rocked forward, the chair leg clacking loudly. "Because he didn't care about justice," Victor yelled, finally cracking. "He only cared about himself. Do you know why he waited 20 years? Because his parents died in Miami one after another last year. There was no one left to disappoint, no inheritance left to lose. It was finally safe for him to clear his conscience." Mendoza watched him closely. He wanted to feel better. "He was a coward," Victor sneered, tears spilling down his cheeks again. "He let her die, he ran away, and now he wanted to come back and play the tragic, reformed hero. If he confessed, the news would be everywhere. The reporters would dig up the story. They'd drag her name through the mud just so Elian could get a lighter sentence and a clear conscience." "And you couldn't let that happen," Mendoza said. "I was the only one who actually loved her," Victor cried, his voice breaking. "I worshipped her. I never told her, because Elian was my friend, and I didn't want to stand in their way, but I was the only one who stayed. I kept the memory of her alive." Mendoza tapped her fingers against the table. "So you brought him back to San Malvino General?" Victor nodded miserably, wiping his nose against his shoulder. "I told him my shift didn't start until 11, but I could show him around. I told him the hospital roof had the absolute best view of the island. He followed me right into the elevator." "And when you got to the attic?" Mendoza prompted. "I told him what a selfish, pathetic coward he was," Victor whispered, dropping his gaze back to the plastic cup. "I told him he didn't get to ruin her memory just to make himself feel better. He tried to deny it. He tried to say he loved her, so I stopped him." "Where did you get the 9mm?" Lucien asked. "I worked a graveyard shift all my life," Victor answered numbly. "I got a carry permit 6 years ago for safety reasons. I just pulled it out of my waistband." The rattling hum of the air conditioner filled the heavy silence that followed. "You understand that this is a full confession to premeditated murder," Mendoza said, closing her notebook and standing up. "Yes," Victor whispered. He looked up at her, his red eyes wide and desperate for some kind of absolution. "But I kept her safe, detective. I kept her memory clean." Mendoza looked down at him for a long, heavy moment. There is nothing clean about putting a bullet in a man and stuffing him in a morgue drawer, Victor, Mendoza said coldly. You didn't protect her. You just made sure you were the last man to use her death as an excuse. Chapter 13. I can't feel my arms, Gary groaned, gripping the porch railing with both hands like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth. Val hauled him up the last step by the back of his neon blue tracksuit, which was currently covered in sand, sweat, and what looked suspiciously like dried seaweed. "Abandon ship!" Polly screeched from his shoulder, flapping his wings. "Man overboard!" He did 3 hours of commercial deck drills, Val said, dropping Gary onto the porch swing. He threw up twice. She made me pull a heavy, wet rope across the beach for 45 minutes, Gary gasped, letting his head loll back against the cushions. There wasn't even a boat attached to it, just sand. I have decided to officially retire from the maritime industry. I am going to pivot to a strictly supportive, land-based boyfriend role. I will wave a white handkerchief from the docks when you set sail. That is my final offer. I accept, Val laughed, kissing the top of his sweaty head before walking over to grab a beer from Reg's cooler. You're a terrible rigger anyway. The garden gate clicked open, and Shannon trudged up the path. She was carrying 3 heavy canvas bags stuffed with paint tubes, brushes, and crumpled paper, looking exhausted. She dropped the bags onto the porch floorboards with a heavy, exhausted thud. I need a drink, she announced. Something strong enough to erase the last 8 hours of my life. Did Ms. Belvedere and Howie reconcile? Alex asked, pouring a glass of white wine and handing it over. You wish, Shannon said, collapsing into a chair and taking a long sip. They escalated to physical sabotage. Howie hid her reading glasses in the brush-washing jar, so Ms. Belvedere accidentally squirted a whole tube of titanium white onto his fluffy sandals. I had to put them in separate timeout corners. Do you know how humiliating it is to put a retired botanist in a timeout? I deal with Lucien, Crane, and my uniforms every day, so yes, Mendoza muttered from her spot, leaning against the porch post. Hey, Lucien said defensively from the stairs. I forget my gun sometimes. So what? The front door of the house opened, and Rafa walked out carrying a cold bottle of sparkling water. He walked straight past everyone and handed it politely to Marta. Thank you, Raphael, Marta said, eyeing him suspiciously as she took the bottle. Why are you being so nice to me? I am always a gentleman, Rafa said smoothly, taking a seat. But since we are on the subject of hospital property, I wanted to circle back to the Fiamma A61 espresso machine currently gathering dust in your attic. Marta groaned, rubbing her temples. Raphael, I have been dealing with the fallout of a murdered man and a homicide suspect hiding in my hospital all afternoon. I have not had time to think about an antique coffee maker. It is not just a coffee maker, Marta. It is a piece of culinary history, Rafa insisted gently. It is rusting away next to a pile of broken wheelchairs. It deserves to be loved. I already checked the replacement gaskets online. Fine, Marta sighed, throwing her free hand up in surrender. If you make a proper donation to the pediatric ward, I will sign the scrap release paperwork tomorrow morning. Just stop talking about it. Done, Rafa said instantly. Maybe when I come to pick it up, I can take you to lunch? We'll see about that, Marta smiled. Gary made googly eyes at Shannon and whispered, Did you hear it? He asked her out on a date. I did no such thing, Rafa blushed. It's just a neighborly lunch. Yeah, we all heard that story, Reg laughed. Just don't forget to disinfect that murder scene coffee machine. Has Victor said anything else since you brought him in? Alex asked, looking over at Mendoza. He hasn't stopped talking, Mendoza said, staring down at her beer label. He confessed to everything, waived his right to a lawyer, and signed the statement. Now he just sits in the holding cell staring at the wall. The guy completely broke. What about the Vargases? Alex asked, taking a sip of her wine. Are you going to arrest them? I have to, Mendoza said, sighing. They took money to cover up a vehicular manslaughter, and they lied to the police during an active homicide investigation. I'm sending a squad car to the historic district to pick up Hector and Sophia tomorrow morning. Why not today? Lucien asked. Because I am officially off the clock, Mendoza said flatly. This whole day has been weird, and I never expected this case to end the way it did. There was no criminal mastermind. There was no grand conspiracy. Just a coward who waited too long to apologize, a couple of greedy parents, and a guy who spent 20 years obsessing over a ghost. It's just sad. I don't want to look at a single piece of paperwork until tomorrow. I second that, Lucien said, raising his bottle in the air. To a highly successful, completely depressing end to the week. Cheers! The porch echoed in unison. Reg took a sip of his beer, lowered the bottle, and looked thoughtfully at Mendoza. Hey, Angela, he said smoothly. Since you're going over to the old district tomorrow anyway, do you think you could swing by that Ventanita on the corner and grab me a box of guava pastelitos? Or two? Mendoza stared at him. You want me to stop for pastries on my way to arrest 2 senior citizens for conspiracy? Why not? It's on the same street. Alex closed her eyes and let out a long, heavy sigh. I give up. I tried to introduce healthy eating habits into this house, but I'm afraid that's not meant to happen. Alex, honey, Reg said, leaning over to her, my granddad is almost 93 years old. The man considers ketchup a vegetable, he salts his bacon, and he drinks his first scotch at noon every single day. The O'Malley men have ironclad arteries. I guarantee you I won't make you a widow anytime soon. You're impossible, Alex rolled her eyes at him. I know, Reg said with a mischievous grin. That's exactly why you married me. Bombay woofed and put his head in Alex's lap. Reg reached into his cargo pocket, pulled out a thick, slightly squished piece of beef jerky and tossed it to him. Bombay snapped it out of the air with a loud clack of his jaws. Good boy, Reg chuckled, scratching the dog behind the ears. See, we all are food-motivated. Polly flew over and sat on Bombay's head. Food-motivated we are! This has been Death by Graveyard Shift, a hilarious feel-good cozy mystery. Book 27 in the Island Whodunit series, written by Tess Marlowe.
Thank you for listening to Death by Graveyard Shift. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next mystery. See you on San Malvino.